The gunshot that killed Patrick Irwin's wife echoed through the Arizona Territory in the spring of 1878, and for 3 years afterward, he never tasted a hot meal that mattered. He ate jerky standing up, beans cold from the can, hardtack that could break a tooth, all of it swallowed without pleasure or purpose, fuel for a body that kept moving when his heart had stopped. Patrick was 32 years old and felt ancient, his ranch outside Pahrump, Nevada a sprawling emptiness where cattle grazed and nothing else lived. The hands he employed came and went, paid their wages, never stayed for supper because he never offered. He had loved Catherine with the kind of devotion that ruins a man when it ends, and when the fever took her sudden and cruel, he buried not just his wife but every warm thing inside himself. The evening he met Sylvia Whitmore. Patrick had ridden 15 miles to town for supplies, his saddlebags empty, his prospects for dinner grim as always. Pahrump was growing, the silver mines bringing fortune seekers and trouble in equal measure, but Patrick kept to himself, nodding to acquaintances, speaking only when commerce required it. He had just left the general store when he heard the crash, the sound of breaking glass followed by a woman's sharp cry. His instincts moved him before his mind caught up, boots hitting the dusty street as he rounded the corner to find a scene of chaos. A woman knelt among scattered belongings, her trunk split open on the ground, clothes and cookware spread across the dirt. The stagecoach that had deposited her was already pulling away, the driver shouting something about schedules and no refunds. She was perhaps 28, dark hair escaping from pins, her traveling dress covered in dust, and her face held an expression Patrick recognized all too well, the look of someone whose plans had just shattered beyond repair. "Madam," Patrick said, removing his hat, "you hurt?" She looked up at him, green eyes sharp despite the distress. "Only my pride and my trunk. The lock was faulty. The driver refused to wait while I gathered everything." Patrick knelt and began collecting scattered items, a hairbrush, a small framed photograph, a cast iron skillet that had somehow survived intact. "Where were you headed?" "The boarding house on Main Street. Mrs. Henderson's place. I have a room reserved." Her voice carried an Eastern accent, refined but not pretentious. "I am Sylvia Whitmore. I came to teach at the new school. Patrick Irwin." He handed her the photograph, careful not to look too closely at the faces within. "I know Mrs. Henderson. Her place is 3 blocks up. I can help you carry this." "I could not possibly impose. No imposition. Cannot leave a lady's belongings in the street." They worked in silence, gathering everything back into the broken trunk, which Patrick then hefted onto his shoulder alongside her carpetbag. Sylvia walked beside him, attempting to brush dust from her skirts, and Patrick found himself uncomfortably aware of another person's presence in a way he had not been for years. She smelled like rosewater and train smoke, and when she spoke, her voice carried a warmth that felt foreign as a summer rain. "Have you lived in Pahrump long, Mr. Irwin?" "Near 7 years. Have a ranch north of town. It must be beautiful country." Patrick considered the sage-covered hills, the distant mountains, the endless sky that had witnessed both his greatest joy and deepest sorrow. "It serves, Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a tidy 2-story structure, painted white with green shutters, one of the newer buildings that signaled Pahrump's aspirations toward civilization. The proprietor herself answered Patrick's knock, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Whitmore, we expected you on the earlier stage, and Patrick Irwin, as I live and breathe, have not seen you in town after dark in I cannot remember how long." Her trunk broke Constance, just helping with the load. "Bring it right up to the front room. Miss Whitmore, you must be famished." Supper is just finishing. Nothing fancy, but plenty of it." Patrick set the trunk down in a pleasant room with lace curtains and a view of the street, then made to leave, duty discharged, ready to return to the cold meal waiting in his saddlebag. But Mrs. Henderson caught his arm. "Patrick Irwin, you will stay for supper. I have made far too much chicken and dumplings, and I know for a fact you have not eaten properly since Catherine passed. I should get back. Your ranch will survive another hour. Sit down." There was no arguing with Constance Henderson when she used that tone. Patrick found himself at a long dining table with 5 other boarders, miners mostly, and Sylvia Whitmore across from him, her hair now properly pinned, her face washed, looking more composed but still carrying the uncertainty of someone in a strange place far from home. The food came out steaming, chicken and dumplings in thick gravy, biscuits with butter, green beans cooked with bacon, and the smell alone nearly unmade Patrick. He had forgotten food could smell like comfort, like care, like someone gave a damn whether you lived or died. When he took the first bite, something in his chest cracked, not breaking exactly but shifting like ice starting to thaw. "This is wonderful," Sylvia said to Mrs. Henderson. "I have not had a proper meal since leaving Philadelphia." "Philadelphia," one of the miners said. "Long way from home, miss." "Everywhere is far from somewhere," Sylvia replied with a small smile, "and I needed somewhere new." Patrick understood that sentiment more than he would say. Sometimes staying in a place meant drowning in memories. Sometimes leaving was the only way to breathe. But he had stayed because the ranch was all he had built with Catherine, and abandoning it would have been abandoning her again. After supper, Patrick stood to leave, thanking Mrs. Henderson, nodding to the other guests. Sylvia walked him to the door, and in the fading light of the hallway, she looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you for your help today, Mr. Irwin. You likely saved me from a much worse evening." "Just basic decency, madam. Nevertheless, I am grateful." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you lost your wife. I am sorry for your loss." Patrick's jaw tightened. He never knew what to say when people offered condolences, especially 3 years distant from the event. "Appreciate it. Welcome to Pahrump, Miss Whitmore." He left before she could say anything else, stepping out into the cool Nevada night and all the way back to his ranch. He could still taste those dumplings, still feel the strange discomfort of sitting at a table with other people, of being seen and spoken to as if he were still part of the living world. The next weeks passed in their usual rhythm. Patrick worked the ranch, fixing fences, moving cattle, managing his small crew of hands who came in from the line camps for supplies and wages. He went into town only when necessary, and when he did, he saw Sylvia Whitmore occasionally, walking to the schoolhouse or browsing the general store, always polite, always proper, and always alone. Pahrump had few single women, and those it had were either spoken for or disinclined toward matrimony. The miners and cowboys paid Sylvia attention, but she deflected it with practiced grace, friendly without being encouraging. Patrick heard the talk, as he heard all town gossip when he bothered to listen. She was a widow herself, married young to a man who died in a factory accident back east. No children, no family left worth mentioning, came west because teaching positions were plentiful and memories in Philadelphia were not. Patrick told himself it was none of his business. He told himself he had no interest in other people's sorrows, had enough of his own to manage. But when he went to town on a Saturday in late June and saw Sylvia leaving the general store with a heavy crate of books, he found himself crossing the street before he could think better of it. "Need help with that, Miss Whitmore?" She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Irwin, I did not expect to see you in town for supplies. That looks heavy." The school board finally approved funds for new readers. I am absurdly excited about books, which I realize sounds quite dull. Not dull. Patrick took the crate from her hands, ignoring her protest. Where do they go? The schoolhouse, but truly I can manage. Already carrying them. Might as well finish the job. They walked together down the dusty main street, past the saloon where a piano played badly, past the assayer's office where men weighed their hopes in silver and gold. The schoolhouse was a simple structure, wood frame with a bell tower, large windows to let in light. Inside, it smelled of chalk and new lumber, desks arranged in neat rows, a blackboard covering most of the front wall. "You have made it nice," Patrick said, setting the crate down on the teacher's desk. "The children deserve a pleasant space. Some of them come from very rough circumstances." Sylvia began unpacking books, handling each one with reverence. "I have 23 students, ranging from 6 years old to 15. Teaching them all at once is chaotic, but I love it." "Catherine wanted children," Patrick said, then stopped, shocked he had spoken the words aloud. Sylvia looked at him with careful sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson told me a bit about your wife, that she was kind and loved horses. She did." Patrick felt the need to leave to escape this conversation before it went deeper, but his feet would not move. "We only had 2 years together. Fever took her quick. My husband and I had 3 years. Samuel was a good man, but I will not pretend it was a grand passion. We were companions more than lovers. His death was terrible, but I recovered from it perhaps quicker than I should have." Her honesty startled him. People usually dressed grief in prettier language, made loss into something noble. Sylvia just told the truth, and Patrick found it refreshing. "No right way to grieve," he said. "No, but I think there are wrong ways to continue. I do not mean that as judgment, Mr. Irwin. Only observation." Patrick met her eyes, saw the challenge there, gentle but real. "You saying I am doing it wrong?" "I am saying hot meals taste better than cold ones, and company is better than solitude, and living is better than just surviving. But you have to decide that for yourself." She turned back to her books, giving him the space to leave or stay as he chose. Patrick stood there, hat in his hands, feeling something uncomfortable and necessary rising in his chest. He thought about his ranch, his empty house, his cold suppers eaten standing at the stove, and for the first time in 3 years he wondered if Catherine would actually want him living that way. "Mrs. Henderson still serves supper at 6?" he asked. Sylvia smiled, small but genuine. "Every evening except Sunday, when she goes to her sister's. Might see you there sometime." "I hope you do, Mr. Irwin." Patrick left the schoolhouse feeling strange, like he had agreed to something significant without quite understanding the terms. He finished his business in town, loaded his supplies, and rode back to the ranch as the sun lowered toward the western mountains. That night, he heated a can of beans on the stove and sat down at the table to eat them. A small thing, a nothing thing, but it felt like a beginning. July brought scorching heat to the Nevada desert, the kind that made cattle listless and men short-tempered. Patrick spent long days ensuring his stock had water, riding between springs and checking on the hands at the line camps. It was honest work, exhausting work, the kind that left him too tired to think much, which had always been the point. But thoughts came anyway now, unbidden. He would find himself wondering what Sylvia was doing, whether the schoolhouse got too hot in the afternoons, if she was settling well into Pahrump society. The wondering annoyed him, felt like a betrayal of Catherine's memory, but it persisted nonetheless, a low hum beneath his daily routines. He went to town on a Thursday, earlier than planned, telling himself he needed nails for a fence repair that could honestly have waited. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house drew him like a magnet, and he arrived just as supper was being served, taking a seat at the long table as if he had been doing it all along. Sylvia looked pleased to see him, a flash of genuine happiness that made Patrick's chest tight. They ate Mrs. Henderson's pot roast and potatoes, and Patrick answered questions from the other boarders about cattle prices and water rights, feeling rustier at conversation than he had realized. After the meal, Sylvia walked him out to the porch and they stood in the cooling evening air watching Pahrump settle into night. "I am glad you came," Sylvia said. "Mrs. Henderson was glad too. She worries about you. Constance worries about everyone. It is her nature. Perhaps. But some people merit more worry than others." Sylvia leaned against the porch railing, her profile soft in the twilight. "Have you lived alone on your ranch all this time? Have hands who help with the work, but the house is just me. That sounds lonely. Got used to it." Used to something is not the same as preferring it. She looked at him directly. "Would you like company sometime? I could bring supper out to your ranch, cook a proper meal, as thanks for your help when I arrived." Patrick's instinct was to refuse, to protect the isolation he had built so carefully. But the memory of hot food and warm conversation pulled at him, and beneath his fear was a loneliness so deep he had stopped feeling it, the way you stop feeling the cold when you are freezing to death. "You do not need to thank me for that. Perhaps I want to anyway. Perhaps I would enjoy the company as much as you might." Her honesty again, that directness he was starting to appreciate. Patrick considered his empty house, his cold meals, his half-life, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. "Sunday," he said. "Could show you the ranch if you are interested. Bring whatever you need for cooking. Sunday then. I will be ready by noon." Patrick rode home that night feeling something he had not felt in years, something that might have been anticipation or might have been dread. But either way, it was feeling. And that alone was remarkable. Sunday arrived clear and hot, the kind of day that made mirages shimmer on the distant flats. Patrick spent the morning cleaning his house with an urgency that embarrassed him, sweeping floors that had not been properly swept in months, washing dishes that had piled up, opening windows to air out rooms that smelled of dust and disuse. He found himself looking at the house through a stranger's eyes and seeing how far he had let things slide, how much he had stopped caring about basic order and cleanliness. The bedroom he left alone, the door closed as it had been since Catherine died, her things still inside, untouched, a shrine he could not bring himself to dismantle or enter. He rode into town just before noon, finding Sylvia waiting outside Mrs. Henderson's with a large basket and a bag of supplies. She wore a simpler dress than usual, practical for travel and work, her hair braided back from her face. "I hope I did not pack too much," she said as Patrick secured her things behind his saddle, "but I wanted to make something worthwhile." "Anything hot is worthwhile." She smiled at that, and Patrick helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, acutely aware of her presence against him, the warmth of her back, the scent of her hair. They rode north out of Pahrump, into the open country where Patrick's land began, marked more by knowing than by fences, acres of sage and bunch grass rolling toward distant mountains. "It is beautiful," Sylvia said, her voice carrying over the horse's steady rhythm. "Harsh, but beautiful. Takes a certain disposition to appreciate it." "I think I have that disposition. Philadelphia was crowded, noisy, everything on top of everything else. This feels like you can breathe." They reached the ranch house an hour later, a solid structure Patrick had built with Catherine in their first year, wood frame with a stone chimney, a porch facing west to catch the evening light. The barn and corrals spread out behind it, and in the distance, cattle dotted the landscape like scattered seeds. Patrick helped Sylvia down, then carried her supplies inside, suddenly nervous about how she would judge his space. But she looked around the main room, the kitchen area and sitting area combined, and nodded with approval. "Good bones," she said. "Needs a woman's touch, but good bones. Has not had a woman's touch in some time. Well, let us start with supper and see where that leads." Sylvia unpacked her basket with efficient grace, pulling out chicken already cut and seasoned, vegetables, flour, butter, spices. She moved around Patrick's kitchen like she was learning a new dance, figuring out where things were, what the stove required, how the space functioned. Patrick stood uselessly for a moment, then asked what he could do to help. "Talk to me," Sylvia said, rolling out dough for biscuits. "Tell me about this ranch, about the work, about what you love here." So Patrick talked, haltingly at first, then with more ease. He told her about buying the land, about the first year's struggles with water and predators, about building the house and barn with his own hands and help from neighbors. He talked about Catherine, and the talking hurt, but it was a clean hurt, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. She loved mornings, Patrick said, watching Sylvia work. Would get up before dawn just to see the sunrise, said everyone was different and she did not want to miss any. "She sounds wonderful," she was. "Never thought I would lose her so young. Never thought about losing her at all, if I am honest. We never do." Sylvia put the biscuits in the oven, then turned to face him, her hands dusty with flour. "But we continue anyway because the alternative is not living, and that dishonors everyone we have loved." "Is that what you think I am doing? Not living? I think you are trying. And today is part of trying." The chicken fried in the pan, filling the house with smells Patrick associated with home, with care, with being worth the effort of cooking for. Sylvia made gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans with butter, the kind of meal that required attention and skill and a desire to nourish. When she pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden and perfect, Patrick felt emotion rise in his throat so suddenly he had to turn away. "Patrick." Sylvia's voice was gentle. "Are you all right? Just been a long time." She came to stand beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel her presence. "We can eat outside if you prefer. Sometimes a table has too many ghosts." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw understanding in her eyes, the kind that came from walking similar paths. Outside might be good. They carried everything to the porch, setting up on an old bench Patrick used for watching sunsets. The food was spectacular, each bite reminding Patrick that eating could be pleasure, not just necessity. They ate in comfortable silence at first, then talked about small things, safe things, Sylvia's students and their antics, the politics of the school board, the growth of Pahrump and what it meant for the territory. "You think Nevada will become a state soon?" Sylvia asked, tearing apart a biscuit. "Already is a state, since 1864. Of course, my apologies. I am still learning Western history." She laughed at herself. "Back east, everything after the Mississippi tends to blur together. Lots of folks think that way. Then they come here and realize the West is not one thing, but 1,000 different things. What is it to you?" Patrick considered the question. The landscape spread before them, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains purple in the distance. "Freedom, I suppose. Freedom to build something, freedom to fail, freedom to be left alone when you need it. And when you do not need it anymore. When being alone becomes a cage instead of a freedom." She asked the hard questions. Sylvia did. Never let him settle into easy answers. Patrick set down his plate, his appetite suddenly overwhelmed by other hungers. "Then maybe you need someone to cook you a hot meal and remind you that life is still happening, whether you are paying attention or not." Sylvia smiled, warm and real. "Exactly so." They sat on the porch until the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple Catherine would have loved. Patrick told Sylvia more about the ranch, his plans for expanding the herd, his concerns about water rights and the mining companies moving into the area. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, offering perspectives he had not considered. When the dishes were cleared and packed, and the sun sat low on the horizon, Patrick realized he did not want her to leave. The house would be too quiet after her presence, too empty after her laughter. But he had no right to ask her to stay, no claim on her time or attention beyond this single afternoon. "I should get you back to town," he said, standing reluctantly, "or I could stay a bit longer. If you would like company for the sunset, Catherine's favorite time of day. I know you mentioned that, but Patrick, she is not here to see it and you are, and so am I." The words could have been cruel, but they were not. They were just truth, the kind that hurt because it mattered. Patrick sat back down, and Sylvia settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and they watched the day end together. Two people alone becoming two people together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When full dark came, Patrick rode Sylvia back to Pahrump, the journey quiet under a sky brilliant with stars. At Mrs. Henderson's door, she turned to him, her face barely visible in the dim light from the windows. "Thank you for today, for trusting me with your space and your stories. Thank you for the meal, for the company. May I come again? Next Sunday, perhaps?" Patrick's heart, that long dormant organ, stuttered back to painful life. "I would like that. So would I." She went inside, and Patrick rode home through the darkness. The house he returned to still empty, but somehow less so, as if Sylvia's presence had left an impression on the air itself, a promise of warmth returning. The next Sunday came, and the one after that, establishing a rhythm that shaped Patrick's weeks. He found himself planning for Sylvia's visits, fixing things around the house that had long needed attention, cleaning with actual care, buying supplies in town that would make her cooking easier. The hands noticed the change in him, his improved mood, his willingness to talk more, though they were smart enough not to comment directly. Sylvia brought different meals each week, experimenting with his kitchen, learning its quirks. She made beef stew and cornbread, roasted pork with apples, fried chicken and coleslaw, each meal a revelation, each shared hour a step toward something neither of them named but both recognized growing between them. They talked about everything, their pasts and presents, their hopes and fears, their opinions on politics and religion and human nature. Sylvia was educated in a way Patrick was not, had read books he had never heard of, but she never made him feel lesser for it. She listened to his practical knowledge with the same respect he gave her literary references, and their conversations became a blending of perspectives that enriched both. August heat gave way to September's relative cool, and one Sunday, after they had eaten lunch, Patrick offered to show Sylvia the full extent of his ranch. They saddled 2 horses, Patrick mounting his usual gelding, Sylvia riding a gentle mare he used for easy work, and they spent the afternoon exploring the land that had defined so much of Patrick's adult life. He showed her the spring where water bubbled up clear and cold, the stand of cottonwoods that provided the only real shade for miles, the rocky outcrop where he sometimes sat to think. Sylvia exclaimed over wildflowers Patrick had stopped noticing, pointed out birds he could not name, found beauty in details he had learned to overlook. "You see things different," he said as they paused to water the horses. "I see things fresh. You have looked at this land so long you have stopped really seeing it. Maybe. Or maybe I see it too well. Every place here has a memory attached, Catherine and I rode this whole ranch in our first months. It is hard to look at anything without remembering." Sylvia dismounted and came to stand beside him, her hand settling on his arm, the first intentional touch between them that was not necessary for practical reasons. "Patrick, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. Are you spending time with me because you enjoy my company, or because you are lonely and I happen to be available?" Her directness caught him off guard, but Patrick had learned not to be surprised by Sylvia's willingness to address difficult topics. He thought about his answer, wanting to give her truth, not deflection. Started as the second, if I am being honest. Was lonely, even if I did not want to admit it. But it has become the first. I enjoy your company, Sylvia. I look forward to Sundays more than anything else in my week. You make me laugh, make me think, make me feel like I am still capable of being more than just surviving. Good. She smiled, relief evident in her expression. Because I enjoy your company too, very much. And I wanted to make sure we were both present here, both moving forward, not just clinging to each other out of shared loneliness. Is that what this is? Moving forward, I think it could be, if we both choose it. Patrick looked at Sylvia, her green eyes serious, her expression open and hopeful, and felt the fear that had gripped him since Catherine's death finally start to loosen. He could love again. He could let himself love again. It would not erase Catherine or diminish what they had shared. It would just be different, a new chapter, a continuation rather than a repetition. I would like to choose it, he said quietly, but I am out of practice at courting and I am not sure I remember how to do it properly. Neither am I, so we will figure it out together. She kissed him then, gentle and tentative, and Patrick kissed her back, his arms coming around her waist, pulling her close. It felt strange and wonderful, foreign and right, like speaking a language he had thought he had forgotten but his body remembered anyway. When they pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Sylvia laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Well, that is a promising start." "Promising," Patrick agreed, unable to keep the grin off his face. They rode back to the ranch house, holding hands where the terrain allowed, talking about what came next, where this courtship might lead. Patrick felt lighter than he had in years, the weight of grief still present but no longer crushing, balanced now by possibility, by hope, by Sylvia's presence in his life. Over the following months, Patrick courted Sylvia with a determination that surprised him. He came to town more often, taking supper at Mrs. Henderson's 3 or 4 times a week, walking Sylvia home afterward, stealing kisses on the porch when Mrs. Henderson was not watching. He attended the school's harvest program, watching with pride as Sylvia managed her students with patience and creativity. He brought her flowers from his land, the hardy blooms that survived Nevada's harsh conditions, and she pressed them in books, keeping them as treasures. Sylvia continued coming to the ranch on Sundays, but now Patrick cooked for her sometimes, simple meals that reflected his limited skills but abundant desire to care for her. She taught him to make better biscuits, to properly season meat, to appreciate the art of a well-made meal. They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with increasing familiarity, their partnership growing in small domestic moments. In October, Patrick finally opened the door to the bedroom he had shared with Catherine. Sylvia stood with him as he confronted 3 years of preserved grief, the room exactly as Catherine had left it, her brush still on the vanity, her dress still hanging on the hook. "I need to let this go," Patrick said, his voice rough. "Need to honor her by living, not by building shrines." "What do you want to do with her things? Keep some. Give away others to people who could use them. Make this room mine again, not a museum." They spent the afternoon sorting through Catherine's belongings, Patrick telling stories about different items, crying when the memories overwhelmed him, laughing when he remembered happy moments. Sylvia listened without judgment, helped without pushing, understood that grief was not linear, that moving forward did not mean forgetting. "She would like you," Patrick said as they packed away Catherine's dresses to donate to families in need. Catherine always appreciated direct people. "She would approve." "I hope so. I am not trying to replace her, Patrick. I could never do that. You are not replacing her, you are just you, and that is enough, more than enough." By November, the entire town knew Patrick Irwin and Sylvia Whitmore were courting, and opinion was universally positive. Mrs. Henderson beamed whenever she saw them together. The miners and cowboys who boarded at her establishment offered Patrick congratulations and ribald advice he ignored. The school board expressed satisfaction that their teacher had found suitable companionship with a respectable rancher. The first snow came in late November, dusting the mountains white, turning Pahrump briefly beautiful in the way cold places are beautiful. Patrick rode into town during a storm, arriving half frozen at Mrs. Henderson's just as supper was being served. Sylvia took one look at him and immediately began fussing, wrapping him in blankets, putting hot coffee in his hands, scolding him for riding in such weather. "Had to see you," Patrick said through chattering teeth. "Could not wait until Sunday. You foolish man. You could have frozen." "Worth it." After he warmed up and ate, they sat together in the boarding house parlor, the other guests having retired for the evening. Mrs. Henderson discreetly giving them privacy. Patrick held Sylvia's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, his heart hammering with nervousness. "I have something to ask you," he began, then stopped, uncertain how to proceed. "Then ask." Sylvia's smile was encouraging. "I am not good with fancy words, and I do not have much to offer except a ranch and a stubborn disposition and a heart that has been broken but is healing. But I love you, Sylvia. I love your directness and your kindness and the way you make cold meals hot and lonely men feel seen. Will you marry me?" Sylvia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. "Yes. Yes, Patrick, I will marry you. I love you too, your stubbornness and your slowly opening heart and your determination to keep living even when it is hard. Yes." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, uncaring if Mrs. Henderson or anyone else saw, because Sylvia had agreed to be his wife, and the future that had looked so bleak and empty now stretched before him full of possibility and warmth and love. They married in December, a simple ceremony in Pahrump's small church, attended by Mrs. Henderson, the school board, Patrick's ranch hands, and half the town besides. Sylvia wore a dress she had altered herself, ivory silk with lace at the collar, and Patrick wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust, his hair neatly trimmed. The minister spoke about second chances and the resilience of the human heart, and when Patrick kissed his bride, he felt Catherine's blessing in it, a sense that loving again was not betrayal but continuation, the way seasons change but the earth endures. Sylvia moved into the ranch house, bringing her books and cookware and an energy that transformed the space. She cleaned and organized, hung curtains in the windows, placed flowers on the table, made the house a home again. Patrick watched her settling in with grateful wonder, marveling that he had been lucky enough to find love twice in one lifetime. The first winter of their marriage was cold but happy. Sylvia had resigned from teaching to focus on the ranch, though she tutored some students privately and talked about starting a lending library in Pahrump. She learned to help with ranch work, feeding livestock when weather kept the hands away, managing supplies, keeping books that showed Patrick his business more clearly than he had ever seen it. They cooked together most evenings, Sylvia teaching Patrick more complicated recipes, Patrick showing her shortcuts and efficiency he had learned from necessity. The meals they made were always hot, always shared, always eaten at the table while they talked about their days and their plans and their dreams. At night, they lay together in the bedroom that Patrick had reclaimed, and he told Sylvia about Catherine, keeping those memories alive not as barriers but as stories, part of his history that had shaped him but did not define him. Sylvia listened and told him about Samuel, her first husband, and they honored their pasts together while building their present. Spring came in 1882, and with it, the realization that Sylvia was pregnant. Patrick received the news with joy so intense it frightened him, memories of hoping for children with Catherine mixing with excitement for this new life coming. Sylvia navigated his complex emotions with patience, understanding his fears without letting them overwhelm the happiness. "We cannot control what happens," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "But we can choose to hope, to love, to be present for whatever comes. I am terrified of losing you. I know, but Patrick, you cannot protect me by holding back. You can only love me fully and trust that we will face whatever comes together." He pulled her close, kissed her temple, breathed in the scent of her hair and chose trust over fear, hope over despair. The pregnancy progressed without complication. Sylvia blooming with health, glowing with the contentment of a woman satisfied with her life. Patrick hovered and worried, but he also planned, building a cradle with his own hands, cleaning out a room for the nursery, imagining a child filling the house with noise and chaos and joy. In October of 1882, after a long labor that aged Patrick a decade in a single night, Sylvia delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Patrick, honoring both their first spouses, acknowledging the past while celebrating the present. Patrick held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by love and terror and gratitude so intense he could barely breathe. "We made him," Sylvia said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "We made this perfect thing together. We did." Patrick kissed his wife, then his son, his heart too full for words. Samuel grew strong and healthy, a laughing child with Patrick's dark hair and Sylvia's green eyes. The ranch thrived under their combined management, expanding slowly but steadily, gaining a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Patrick hired more permanent hands, building a bunkhouse for them, creating a small community around his land. Sylvia started her lending library in town, donating many of her own books, soliciting donations from others, creating a space where Parham's children and adults could access knowledge. She remained involved in education, though no longer formally teaching, and became a respected voice in town planning and development. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Sylvia had twins, a boy and a girl they named Catherine and Thomas. Patrick wept when he held his daughter, feeling as if Catherine's spirit had returned in new form, a blessing he had not dared hope for. The house filled with children's laughter, with the chaos of family, with the kind of noise that signified life being lived fully. Patrick never forgot his first wife, never stopped missing her in quiet moments. But he learned that grief and joy could coexist, that honoring the dead meant living fully, and that love was not finite but expandable, growing to encompass everyone who earned a place in his heart. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Patrick and Sylvia sat on their porch, watching Samuel chase the twins through the yard while the sun set in familiar glory. The ranch spread around them, prosperous and peaceful, the product of hard work and shared vision. "I ate cold meals alone for 3 years," Patrick said, taking Sylvia's hand, "convinced that was all I deserved, all I could expect. And then I cooked hot food and you sat down with me. Sylvia smiled, squeezing his fingers. Grateful. More than grateful. Blessed. You saved my life, Sylvia. Not in a dramatic way, but in all the small, important ways that matter. We saved each other. I was as lost as you were, just better at hiding it. She leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment evident in every line of her body. We found our way together. The children's laughter echoed across the land, mixing with the sounds of cattle lowing, horses nickering, the wind moving through sage. Patrick thought about how far he had come from that broken man eating jerky alone, how much life could change when you let it, when you chose to keep living even when it hurt. He had been widowed and lost, eating cold meals in empty silence. She had cooked hot food and offered companionship. He had sat down with her, grateful for the warmth. And from that simple beginning, they had built a love that honored the past while embracing the future, a partnership that nourished both their bodies and souls. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in colors that never got old, and Patrick pulled his wife closer, their children playing nearby, their life together stretching forward full of promise and hope, and the kind of love that made every meal, every moment, every day worth savoring. Years continued to unfold in the predictable unpredictability of ranch life. The children grew, Samuel becoming his father's shadow, learning to ride and rope and manage cattle with the natural ease of a child born to the work. Catherine proved to have her mother's sharp mind and her father's determination, a combination that suggested she would never be content with traditional limitations. Thomas was the dreamer, quieter than his siblings, always reading the books from his mother's library, talking about places beyond Nevada's borders. Patrick watched his children grow with pride and occasional terror, knowing how quickly life could change, how fragile happiness could be. But Sylvia kept him grounded, her steady presence a reminder that fear could not protect against loss, only rob the present of joy. They talked often about this, in the quiet moments after the children slept, working through Patrick's lingering anxiety together. "You cannot keep them safe by worrying," Sylvia told him one night when he confessed his fears about Samuel riding alone to the far pastures. "I know that. Knowing it and feeling it are different things. Then feel it, but do not let it control you, or them. They need to grow to take risks, to become who they are meant to be." Patrick kissed her, grateful as always for her wisdom, for her ability to see clearly when his vision clouded with emotion. "How did you get so smart? Years of making mistakes and learning from them. And I had an excellent teacher in you, showing me how to be brave enough to risk love again." By 1887, the ranch employed 15 men full-time, managed nearly 5,000 head of cattle across Patrick's expanded holdings, and had become one of the most successful operations in Nevada territory. Patrick credited Sylvia's management skills as much as his own ranching knowledge, her detailed bookkeeping and strategic planning having guided their growth wisely. They built a larger house, the old one having become too cramped for their expanding family and frequent guests. The new structure was 2 stories, with proper bedrooms for each child, a large kitchen where Sylvia could work comfortably, and a dining room big enough to host gatherings. Patrick insisted on a wide porch running the full length of the house, facing west, so they could continue their tradition of watching sunsets together. The old house became quarters for the ranch foreman and his family, keeping it in use, honoring the space where Patrick and Sylvia's love had first truly bloomed. Sometimes Patrick would walk past it and remember those early Sundays, Sylvia arriving with her basket of food, both of them tentative and wounded, testing whether healing was possible. In 1888, Sylvia became pregnant again, unexpected but welcome. At 38, she worried about complications, but the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in early 1889 she delivered another healthy boy they named John. Patrick held his youngest son and thought about how full his life had become. How unimaginable this blessing would have seemed when he was eating cold beans alone in an empty house. The children adored their baby brother, Samuel taking his role as eldest seriously, the twins gentle and attentive in ways that showed Sylvia's influence. The house rang with noise and life, exactly as Patrick had once dreamed it could be. Pahrump continued growing, the silver mines bringing prosperity and problems in equal measure. Patrick served on the town council, helping manage growth responsibly, advocating for schools and infrastructure. Sylvia's library had become a formal institution, funded by town taxes and donations, housed in its own small building near the schoolhouse. She spent several days a week there, organizing books, helping patrons, hosting reading groups for women who wanted more than what their daily lives offered. They were respected in the community, known for fair dealing, generosity without condescension, and a marriage that seemed to embody what partnership could be. Other widows and widowers looked to them as proof that life could continue after loss, that second chances were real. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Patrick took Sylvia to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children in Mrs. Henderson's capable care, gifting themselves time alone together. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, attended the theater, walked along the waterfront, and rediscovered each other outside their roles as parents and ranchers. "I forget sometimes," Sylvia said as they sat in their hotel room, the city sprawling below them, "that we are more than just mother and father, more than just business partners." "We are lovers," Patrick said, pulling her close. "We are friends. We are two people who chose each other and keep choosing each other every day." "I would choose you every time," Sylvia whispered. "In every life, in every circumstance. You are my home, Patrick, and you are mine." They made love with the passion of newlyweds and the familiarity of long partnership, their bodies knowing each other completely, their connection deepened by years of trust and shared experience. Patrick thought about how different this was from his first marriage, not better or worse but distinct, shaped by who he and Sylvia were individually and who they had become together. When they returned to the ranch, the children mobbed them with hugs and stories, the house chaotic with reunion. Patrick looked around at his family, his home, his life, and felt gratitude so profound it approached religious experience. He had been given a second chance, and he had seized it with both hands, building something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The 1890s brought changes to Nevada and the West. Statehood was long established, but the territory continued evolving, becoming more settled, more civilized, losing some of its rough edges. Patrick watched these changes with mixed feelings, grateful for increased safety and order, nostalgic for the wilder days when the West felt truly open. Samuel, now in his late teens, talked about going to college back east, studying agriculture and animal science, bringing modern knowledge back to improve the ranch. Patrick supported this dream while mourning the approaching empty nest, the inevitable progression of children growing up and away. Catherine, at 15, declared her intention to become a lawyer, a profession barely open to women but increasingly possible. She had her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness, a combination that suggested she would achieve whatever she set her mind to. Thomas wanted to be a writer, filling journals with observations and stories, documenting the West he saw disappearing. Patrick did not fully understand this ambition but supported it, wanting his children to find their own paths rather than simply following his. John, still young, was content helping on the ranch, riding with his father, learning the work, perhaps the one who would eventually take over the family business. Through all these changes, Patrick and Sylvia remained each other's constant, their partnership the foundation on which everything else was built. They still cooked together most evenings, still sat on the porch at sunset, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their love had matured from the tentative hope of early courtship into something solid and enduring, tested by time and proven resilient. In 1895, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Patrick and Sylvia mourned the woman who had brought them together, who had refused to let Patrick eat alone, who had recognized what they needed before they knew themselves. They took over her boarding house, not wanting it to fall into disrepair, converting it into affordable housing for families new to Pahrump, continuing her legacy of care. The turn of the century found Patrick and Sylvia in their 50s, still active and healthy, their children grown or growing, their ranch prosperous, their place in the community secure. They had weathered droughts and market downturns, illnesses and injuries, the normal crises of life, emerging stronger for having faced them together. On a spring evening in 1900, they sat on their porch, the ritual unchanged from 20 years earlier, watching the sun paint the sky. Patrick held Sylvia's hand, her skin soft and familiar, her presence beside him as necessary as breathing. "You ever think about that first day?" Patrick asked. "When your trunk broke and I helped you carry it?" "Often. I think about how lost I felt, how uncertain about my decision to come west." Sylvia smiled at the memory. And then this quiet, sad cowboy appeared and helped without expecting anything in return. "I was so broken then, could barely function beyond work and survival. But you were there, you showed up. And when I offered you hot food and company, you were brave enough to accept it, even though it terrified you." Patrick thought about courage, how people usually imagined it as dramatic action, heroic deeds. But real courage was often quieter, the decision to keep living when you wanted to stop, to risk love when loss had devastated you, to sit down at a table with someone new when every instinct said to stay isolated and safe. "You saved my life," he said simply. "We saved each other." Sylvia leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, her warmth steady and real. "I was drowning in my own grief and loneliness, just better at hiding it. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to cook hot meals and care and build something new. Best thing I ever did was sit down with you that first night at Constance's table. Second best thing. The best thing was deciding to keep sitting down with me, again and again, choosing this life we built together." The sun disappeared below the horizon, the sky fading from brilliant color to soft twilight. Somewhere in the house, their youngest son was practicing his reading. Somewhere across the country, their oldest children were pursuing dreams their parents had helped make possible. The ranch spread around them, the product of decades of work, a legacy they would pass down. Patrick kissed his wife, tender and deep, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership, gratitude and passion, the kind of kiss that said everything words could not. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, content in a way that came only from lives well lived and love well tended. "Let's go in," Sylvia said, standing and pulling Patrick up with her. "I will make us some tea and you can tell me about your plans for the spring calving." "Hot tea sounds perfect." They walked into their house hand in hand, the door closing behind them, the lights warm in the windows, and anyone passing would have seen a home full of life and love, built by a widowed cowboy who ate cold meals alone until a woman cooked hot food and he sat down with her, grateful, and chose to keep living, keep loving, keep building, until loneliness became memory and every meal was shared and warm. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, grandchildren and losses, triumphs and setbacks. But Patrick and Sylvia would face them together, their partnership unshakable, their love a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the power of second chances, to the simple, profound truth that hot meals taste better than cold ones, and sharing them with someone you love makes even the hardest life worth living. Their story was not unique in the particulars, but universal in its themes. Across the West, across the world, people lost and grieved and somehow found the courage to try again, to risk vulnerability, to believe that happiness might still be possible. Patrick and Sylvia were just two among many, but their love was real and hard-won, and worth every moment of fear it took to achieve. As the new century dawned and the Old West became memory, they remained, constant as the mountains, enduring as the land itself, proof that love could survive anything if both people chose it, again and again in big decisions and small moments, in hot meals shared and hands held and sunsets watched together. The widowed cowboy ate cold meals alone until she cooked hot food and he sat down with her, grateful, and in that simple act of acceptance, of willingness to be fed and seen and cared for, began a love story that would last the rest of their lives, warming them against every cold wind, nourishing them through every hardship, reminding them always that they were not alone, had chosen not to be alone, and that choice made all the difference.